it's Nikki and welcome back to Live a Little, your cozy corner of the internet where we explore all of the in-between parts of life, the unpolished, the messy, the honest parts that you may not always feel like you have someone to talk about them with, but we do it all judgment-free. So for today's topic, I wanted to talk about the importance of having varied friendships in your life. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I feel like it's the general overarching thing with every single one of these episodes is that it's something that I've been mulling over a lot. And as I get older, I have been thinking a lot about how my worldview of what a good friend is or what it means to have different variations of friendships means. I think when we're younger, similarity is what draws us to each other and draws us to people. It's like you're 4 years old. You love pink. I love pink. Let's be best friends. But then as you get older, obviously the depth that people have becomes deeper and deeper, and life experiences and cultures and upbringings and whatever else it may be widens and deepens that gap between you and others. And I think it can be in obviously not necessarily always a great way, because if they are unethical views or just not great life views or beliefs, then of course that can be, make or break. But I believe that if they are ethical differences in outlooks or beliefs in life or whatever it may be, I think that can actually be really important to keep you growing as a person and to challenge your perception of like what you know, because ultimately in life we just know what we know to be true, and that isn't right and wrong. Like our perception of, religion or our priorities or whatever it may be can be vastly different to another of our friends, but that doesn't mean that they can't both be true and exist at the same time. And so as I'm getting older, I'm realizing that having variations in your friendship group is super important to challenge you and keep you grounded and to grow your mindset in lots of different ways. Friendships shouldn't all look the same. And if I reflect on what my friendship group looks like now, not one of us have the same ethnicity even. Not one of us have the same kind of family lifestyles. Not one of us have had the same upbringings. And that is not to say there's anything wrong with that, because I also do believe that things that make us similar are what bring us together and what make us feel seen and heard. It could be the same with me saying if I had another friend that had a chronic illness, that would be a similarity that bonds us and that makes us closer. And it makes things easier. And I think, though I say that having friends with different worldviews and different backgrounds is really important to challenge you, equally, sometimes you don't want to be challenged and you do want someone to just hear you and see you and understand you. So I think having both is really important, because it makes life easier if they have the same perception as you, because there's a lot of unspoken things that you don't need to talk about because you just get it and you see each other. It could be as simple as, for me, quite a lot of my friends' parents are no longer together, and I am very lucky that my parents are still together, but obviously I haven't been enlightened in what it is like to have parents that aren't together, and some of them can relate on that themselves and I can't. And it's the same with me and my chronic illness. It's the same with maybe someone being atheist and someone being really religious. Every single thing that we know to be true in our minds and in our lives it doesn't have to be like detrimental to someone else. I think that, because someone has a different perception on something doesn't mean that it has to be a red flag. I feel like even say in dating, you could go on a date, and on that first date, if maybe family is not a big thing to them, of course these are things that are important, like values are really important, but before making preconceptions and judgments on why maybe family isn't a big thing to them, think to maybe discuss more about why that is. Maybe it is their upbringing. Maybe it is, a different worldview, or it's something bigger than just like, oh, they don't care about family. I'm sure it comes from a deeper rooted place. And I think it's really important to have relationships like that shape you without announcing themselves as life-changing. They just you can discuss things openly without it causing friction. And actually, majority of my friends, especially in my like girl group of friends, we will often sit like round a table and discuss different things. I was talking with one of my close friends about pretty privilege and what that means to be someone that grew up having it, which my friend did, and me being someone that didn't, and how we can both go through similar things but also different things, and then discuss what would be good or bad for either side. And I think it's so important to be able to have that rapport with people in your close circle and relationships in your life to allow yourself to grow. It's all enlightenment. And I think if we don't allow ourselves to challenge our own perceptions of what we know to be true in reality, and we don't have that growth mindset, then we get very stuck in our own ways, and we only believe that like it's our way or the highway. And I think it's super important to like communicate differences in opinion and differences in perceptions or right and wrong, so long as it's obviously like in an ethical way and it is right morally. I think there can be so much grey area in how different things are interpreted, and I think that is almost like a beauty to, as you get older, people shouldn't have, in your friendship group, shouldn't all have the same life stories, shouldn't all be the same ages, shouldn't all be the same colours, shapes, sizes, whatever it may be. And if that just has happened to be the case and you've fallen into that's completely fine. Those are your people too. But I do think that when we step outside of ourselves and what we know, that is where we will learn so much in life, because it's stuff that we would have never maybe thought about before. So I think when we're young, we form friendships around similarity and commonality. This is same school, same routines, same humour, same phase of life. But then, and those friendships matter. They matter deeply because they hold you, especially when you are trying to figure out who you are. And commonality is a massive part of empathy. But equally, as you get older, I think things start to shift, and you do meet more people that don't mirror you, whether it's colleagues or it's, I don't know, even your partner or whoever it may be, just even someone that you start talking to on the train, like on your commute to work. And it's people with different upbringings, different family dynamics, different struggles, different beliefs, different ways of essentially seeing the world. And at first that difference can be uncomfortable because it's something that you haven't encountered before necessarily, because it quietly kind of forces you to realize that your experiences aren't universal, and what you thought was normal is actually just familiar to you. But I also think there is something really helpful to know that you will never have life figured out, because there is always more to know. Even the smartest, most knowledgeable person in the world will always not know enough about things, because it's endless. And so I think you can make a bit of peace in that you will never understand, like, I guess in an existential way, the meaning of life, or like why we're all here, or fully figure yourself out, because life as a concept is kind of ever evolving, and perceptions of things and outlooks and cultures are ever changing. So I think it almost allows you to make peace with the fact that you never need to have like a set belief or identity within anything or what you know to be true. And that's a good thing, because I think when we allow ourselves to challenge our own processes of thinking or our own outlooks of life, as simple as a topic it may be, it allows us to connect better with other people. And I think connection is so important, and just making peace with that you don't need to know everything, and it's in not knowing everything that we learn. And I think like enlightenment is my favorite way to explain why it's important to have varied friendships. If I had to sum it up in one word, it's basically just, it could be something as simple as, for me, I was watching a film with some of my friends, and it was not a horror film, but basically it was like, I think we were watching The Lion King or something, and I was saying, isn't it crazy how the majority of villains in films have facial differences and are given these facial augmentations because it's the only way that in media they feel that they can portray a villain, and how that is really damaging for someone like me that has a facial difference, because that is then portrayed in wider society, and what is then kind of perpetrated as what's known to be true, and we then feel more ostracized and made to feel like a monster. And my friends were saying, oh my goodness, we would have never thought about that because it's not something that we've had to deal with. And I think that's exactly why it's important to have varied friendships, is it's basically just opening up their eye to maybe certain things that they wouldn't have otherwise considered because it didn't affect them. And I think that's what life is in general. It's basically just trying to make one another subconsciously, not like, this is what you need to know about, this is the truth, this is like a lesson I want to sit down and teach you. It's not that, not, or trying to tell them what they know is wrong, but basically just like with just knowing each other and different life experiences, it allows you to enlighten people in a way that doesn't have to feel forceful. It doesn't have to feel preachy. It can literally just be an open discussion, or like, have you ever thought about that? I think the whole point is to like provoke thought in one another. And once you see that, you can't unsee it, and you can't unsee how much value variation brings to your life. It's even variation in different types of foods and things like that. If you only know one thing, you only know that one thing, and then you miss out on so many other foods and cultures and things. And so I think it's so important to constantly be searching to learn more and know more. Yeah, so I think that's what I really wanted to talk about, because I think we're kind of taught to fear difference. I think as humans, we're kind of programmed to believe that dissimilarity is a red flag, difference in opinions, difference in ways of living, in worldviews. And actually, we're taught to kind of subtly realize that like similarity equals safety, and thinking differently to you must mean that you are incompatible with someone, whether it's in a friendship or in a romantic relationship, and that it will in turn cause friction down the line. But the older I get, the more I realize how much beauty there is in ethical differences and perspectives that sit outside your own, but are still rooted in kindness and care and respect. Not different views that harm or different views that invalidate, but differences that are shaped by experience. And being close to people who don't see the world the way that I do has taught me that disagreement doesn't automatically mean disrespect. If anything, it's kind of the opposite. It's kind of like, wow, isn't it amazing that we can challenge one another's way of thinking in like a really healthy, open, communicative way, and you can still learn from someone without becoming them. And I think that's it as well, is sometimes I think we're so scared to learn or think about another worldview or a world outside of our own, because we're scared that we'll kind of be shaped by that too much, that we'll lose our own sense of identity and self. But I think that we can keep our sense of self and our individualism while still growing in what we know to be true. And so I think that's what I'm learning, is that you can hold your values firmly while still making space for someone else's. And I think that's also what I've learned in people pleasing, is that dissimilarity felt like, because it would cause friction in a friendship, or that's what I worried about, is having like a disagreement or a different perspective on something, or even a different interest. It could literally be me saying like, this football team is better than this football team. Not that I ever watch football, but like for an example. And if you disagree, I would then be like, oh yeah, no, I didn't mean that. I agree with you. And I would completely shrink what I actually truly believed. Or it could be the same as like someone preferring Taylor Swift to, I don't know, Ariana Grande. Like that can just be an open, like we agree to disagree, like back and forth discussion, rather than it being like we have to end this friendship here, because that's silly. And everyone is going to have different perceptions of everything, because there is only one of us. And I think that's what I've learned, is that people pleasing doesn't have to mean that you can't have your own opinions and your own outlooks and views on life, because every single thing we do, one decision we make today will change our perception on something to like one of our friends. And so that's what I'm learning, is that actually people pleasing can be a really negative thing, because that's when you lose your individuality and your sense of self, because you're constantly just agreeing with what other people are saying because of fear of being disliked or dropped, I think. And I was so worried about maintaining friendships growing up, and that dissimilarity would cause an issue, because friendships are fickle like that. that I just, wouldn't ever express any opinion different to whatever one they were expressing, whether it's in like a big, deep philosophical way about a topic, or literally as simple as like, my favorite color's blue. Oh, mine's actually purple, but now you've said it's blue, mine is now blue, so that we can remain friends, basically. So I think, the whole thing is like small differences can shape you, and sometimes those differences aren't abstract at all. They are simple. For just an example, like I said, it could be as simple as just if you've not ever experienced something, you don't know. And so I think if you go through life in a really humbling way, like, I don't know about these things, please tell me more, I think that is the best way that you can also make friendships with other people, is if you're like, oh, please tell me more about this. Some of the best conversations I've had, especially with strangers, have been when we're talking about a random topic. And maybe I've had like cab drivers who've talked to me about growing up in India, and I'm Indian, but I have a very different perception of what being Indian means, because I didn't grow up in India. I grew up in the UK in more westernized culture, and they grew up in India in the thick of being an Indian culture and what that must mean. And so it's literally just filling that gap of like, well, what are those things that make both different? And I think when you can almost have like a healthy like back and forth of almost like tennis of like, oh, this is my perception of it, what's yours? That actually can leave such room for some of the most meaningful like and poignant and like philosophical conversations that you will have with your friends. And I think it allows you to connect with people so much more deeply than just like surface level conversation. And I feel like makes life more meaningful in general. I think also dissimilarity can affect trust. I think we've learned that if you're dissimilar to someone, it can affect our attachment, our conflict, and our way that we go about love. And it's in things that I've never had to question that have suddenly become things that I've needed to listen to, and I've really been glad that I did. Not to fix them and not to compare, just to understand. And I think that is the whole point of why having varied friendships is so important, because it teaches you that your life and your lived experience isn't the blueprint, it's just your version. And being close to people with different versions of life and of experiences and what they know to be true of like what life is as a concept is really important. And I think letting go of the whole same life stage thinking is imperative to develop as a human and to grow. I feel like there's this unspoken pressure that our friends should be in the same place of life as us in order to remain compatible with us, whether it's the same age, the same milestones. For example, I don't know, some of your friends are getting married and you're still single, or some of your friends are having kids and that's just not something you either want or are in a place to do or can do, or just are at the same pace. Maybe you want a really simple, mundane life, which is completely fine, but one of your friends is like girl boss, like always striving for more and bigger work achievements. Both can be okay and right, but doesn't mean that because one is doing one and one is doing the other that you need to inflict that version that they're doing on yourself. I think both can be right at the same time. And some of the most grounding friendships I've had with people older than me, are younger than me, or have completely different life views and are in different life seasons. Actually, growing up, a lot of the people that I had some of the most meaningful relationships with, that I resonated with the most deeply, were my mum's friends, not people my own age, because there was a different level of depth there, and there was a different level of like emotional maturity that I was more on their kind of wavelength of than someone that was my age and like a normal 8-year-old self. And I think that's what is really important, is that like some of my favorite conversations are with people that I actually have very little in common with, but that is kind of why they're even more interesting, because I think sometimes commonality, as important as it is, it can be quite boring at times, because then there is sometimes not new things to discuss or talk about that are challenging or different. Friends who aren't chasing the same things, it's friends who remind me that there isn't one correct timeline or one correct worldview, basically. And those friendships, I think, pull you out of comparison and widen your sense of what life can look like for different people all over the world. And so we live in a culture where friendship is often, I think, romanticized massively and fantasized, and that friendship groups should all look the same, and you are someone's person if you have loads to connect on. And I think that can be true to an extent. It's like, oh, you're my person, you just get me. But equally, I think someone can also be your person and it take a bit of time for them to work out like how you think and how your mind works. Like, I have both friendships where from the moment I met certain friends, it was like, you just see me, and it's like this unspoken understanding. And then others, they need a bit more work, but actually can still have the same value, just in a slightly different way. Not everyone needs to think the same or live the same. I think the whole like, you're just like me trope in relationships and friendships can actually be quite like damaging. And I had that a lot, actually. I was actually really fickle in if someone had one kind of slightly different, I don't know, like it could be as simple as like, oh, someone finding something funny that I don't find funny. I would then define that as like, oh, they're not my person, like they just don't get me, or like they said this and that didn't quite agree with me, and like therefore we just don't align, it's not going to work as a friendship or like even in a romantic way. And actually that's just very fickle to kind of be like, okay, yeah, like that's it, we're done. Because friendships don't work like that. They're things you have to constantly build on and constantly ever grow on and develop. It's the same with like a romantic relationship, where it needs a lot of hard work actually to continue evolving and growing, and for you to both grow together. Yeah, I think from like the age of time, we learned that, oh, you're just like me, we speak the same language, is important. Of course it's important, because you can relate to things that other people won't. But it can actually be really damaging, because then you define the significance or importance of a relationship based on what makes you similar as people. And I think someone can see you just as deeply but not have the exact same perceptions on a situation or on life than the one that thinks about things the exact same way that you do, if that makes sense. But because real friendship isn't about sameness, and it's out of curiosity, and it's out of mutual respect, and it's out of care. Some friends I've learned are not going to be just my person and meet me where I am with every single thing in life, but that's okay. I've made peace with that. Some friends are for laughter, and some friends are for depth, and some friends are to ground you, and some friends are to challenge you or to lift you up or to celebrate you in a different way. It's not one size fits all with friendship, and they don't need to be your everything. I think it's very different in the sense, I think this is why we're even pickier in terms of romantic relationship, because it feels like you've only got that one person that needs to match you in every single way. So I think romantic relationships is a completely different topic, because it's like that one person does need to match you in some regards. But in terms of friendships, where you have a bit more space to like push and pull, because they aren't necessarily going to be your like romantic life partner, I think you can realize that they don't need to be your everything, and they don't need to fulfill you in every single way in life in order for them to be a good friend or be the right fit in your life for you. And so varied friendships aren't always easy. And so I think that's why sometimes as soon as like someone with a different opinion arises, you're like, yeah, we're not gonna be close, we're not gonna be friends. But actually sometimes you just will misunderstand each other, and sometimes there will be the wrong thing said, and sometimes you realize you never had to think about something before and now you will, because you've been enlightened to it, like my friends with the whole villain facial difference thing. But learning is how you stay curious, and instead of being defensive about it, some of the most valuable things a relationship can teach you are the things that you wouldn't have known otherwise. And so that is what I'm learning, is that dissimilarity doesn't need to lead to defensiveness or friction, and it's not a red flag, it's actually a green flag, especially if it's just different perspectives but not in a moral different way, if that makes sense. And having friends with different lived experiences have softened my judgments. I think they've deepened my empathy, and made me more aware of a world beyond my own. I think we get caught up in our own heads and in what's consuming our worlds, that sometimes we struggle to look outside a world of our own. And I think it's really important to do that for also perspective as well. And I've realized that over time, really, I think the healthiest relationships of any kind don't mirror what you already believe. They softly challenge you. Not in a confrontational way, not in a way that makes you feel small or in a way of like, I know more than you, but just in a way that asks you to pause, to look again, and to consider that what you know isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. And a lot of my closest friends are deep thinkers. Like, we've lived a lot of life in different ways. And I think that's why we've connected and resonated with one another so deeply. We've spent a lot of life getting a lot of life experience under our belt in good ways and bad ways. And I think it's bonded us, honestly, a lot more. There's this shared understanding, I think, when you grow up with a lot of experiences from an early age. And sometimes it's painfully and sometimes it's differently than others. But I think growing up and going through so much but still choosing to be open is really difficult at times. Like, there's times where, because I've been through so much in life, I'm just very shut off to any other person's idea or outlook on life than my own. Like, even the whole like everything happens for a reason idea, I find that very damaging. But I also think that if in someone's life that is what they need to tell themselves or believe to be true to get them through some of the hardest times, then that is also okay. And so I think you can like disagree on like some of the most simple things, but also be like, well, that doesn't need to be wrong, because if that's right for you, then that's right for you, and that's what helps you through. And so I think staying open anyway in a time where life is at its utmost challenging and where it'd be a lot easier to just close off like outlook to the world and our mindset and not grow in like the way we think would be a lot easier. I think it's actually really special, and like it takes a lot to just stay open to different perspectives, especially if you've been burned by people in the past and maybe damaging perspectives, because not all different perspectives are good. And that's what I want to kind of separate, is that like, that's why I say they're like ethical differences, because they are differences that don't harm anyone, that don't damage anyone, that don't invalidate anyone, but can still ring true in their own lives or just make you know about something you otherwise wouldn't have. So I think there definitely needs to be a distinction, because one is definitely a red flag, but the other isn't. And I think making that distinction in life is super important with navigating where the value in a friendship or a relationship comes from, or where you believe it doesn't, basically. Those friendships don't just comfort me, they stretch me. And I think stretching one another is really important in life, especially when we can get stuck in one worldview or a one-track mind. I think being gently challenged by people who care about you is one of the greatest forms of respect there is, honestly. And I think it's almost something beautiful that you have such like a deep and healthy relationship that you can talk about topics without having to walk on eggshells with one another. Obviously, tread gently if it's something that maybe the other person will have a hard time hearing or be different to yours in a real way. But I also think that there is so much respect that you can have for one another when you feel like you can challenge like a different way of thinking gently, basically. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say, is that varied friendships is super important because it leads you down so many other roads that you otherwise wouldn't have even like turned the corner to. It basically takes you on detours to look at landscapes of things you otherwise wouldn't have even looked at, because you wouldn't have even taken that road. And I think that is in some of the best experiences in life that will happen, is when you take detours of things that you never intended to in the first place, because it was something that you didn't know prior. And so my little thought of the week is, if your circle looks, thinks and lives exactly like you, which is completely okay, there is no shaming here, that is normal. And especially if you grow up in maybe a countryside or places where people look more similar. I'm very, very lucky that having varied friendships is a lot easier, because I live in a city. I live in London, which is like every single person is different, because there is so much room to be different. So I also completely understand where if you've not been given room to be allowed to be different, then it makes complete sense that is reflected in your friendship groups or in your relationships with others. Because I am so lucky, especially looking the way that I do, having a facial difference, that I live somewhere where they are slightly more open, like London. Of course, every place has its faults, but I know I'm really lucky in that. And so I think I really understand that having one worldview or one perception or one thing that is known to be true can completely be because of how you've been brought up or where you live or whatever it may be. But I think that's where the internet is great, because even if you may not necessarily have that in your real life, then you can also try and explore that where you may not feel like you have it anyway. I think basically what I'm saying is just having varied relationships throughout all of your life and varied outlooks is super, super important. And actually the opposite can be quite detrimental, because it doesn't allow yourself the room to grow. So with that being said, if your friendship group does look the same, maybe ask yourself why. Again, not in a guilty way, but in a curiosity way. Who widens your world just by being themselves? I could list more than two hands how different friendships and different relationships through my life, whether it was for one point in my life or is current or is ongoing, friends that are constantly challenging what I know and what I know to be true by just existing and being in my life. And yeah, I think just asking yourself, what do you feel like you could do with more of in those friendships? And I think having a really healthy dialogue is super, super important. The healthiest relationships have a really good line of communication where you can challenge one another without it being detrimental. And so yeah, just ask yourself that in a curious way. Why do you think your friendship group looks the way you do? And what qualities in each of your friends do you feel like has grown you as a person? It doesn't even need to be like a difference in worldview or religion or things that are a bit more deep and divisive. It could literally be they approached a situation in a lot more of they approached a situation where I would have taken a pessimistic lens to it instantly in a more optimistic way, and I want to grow in that. You know, it could even just be outlook. Like, it does not have to be like a deep, like divisive thing. It could literally just be a simple outlook or way that they like go about their day. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk about that, because I think in a time where friendships can often feel like you being the same as others is what should draw you to one another, which that is true, and both can exist at the same time. I think that it's also a more divisive time than ever. And I think having relationships where it feels like a healthy dialogue is super important, because it's very easy to get just stuck in what you know. And so some friendships will mirror you and others will stretch you, and both matter. You cannot have one without the other. But the ones that quietly change you, the ones that teach you without announcing themselves, those are the friendships that will stay with you for life. And if you're lucky enough to have people in your life that see the world differently to you, hold on to that, because that is a beautiful thing. Life experience is the one thing that all of us have in common to draw upon and to find commonality and dissimilarity in. And so, yeah, that is what I wanted to say. Hold on to how lucky you are actually to live somewhere or have a group of friends or relationships where you have the privilege to have different worldviews or different experiences to grow from one another. I think there is so much privilege in actually being able to draw upon like people's life experiences as your guidance is, basically. I think we are all basically lessons for one another, and I think that's super important to look at them in a really open-minded way. So yeah, I think as I get older, it's definitely something I'm thinking about more, how friendships are not one size fits all, and that is okay. And different friendships mean different things, and that is okay. And I just think it was something that's really important in a time where we can feel more different than ever, to actually find some comfort in that, and why actually differences are really important, especially with your close relationships and loved ones, so long as they are conveyed in a positive and respectful way. So maybe sometimes it's worth, when you're just sat around the table with friends, just throwing out an idea that you guys have never discussed, and just like, not something really divisive, please, but just something that can be really simple. It literally could be like, why is this musician better than this musician? It could literally be Drake versus Kendrick Lamar, and just let that just do the talking for itself. It could be something super simple, but I think practicing open discussions is super important. It's kind of like a gentle debate, and I think we all need gentle debates in life to grow. So yeah, that is this week's topic. I think it's just a really thought-provoking one, because we can all relate to it at any age of life, and friendship and what it's defined by, and what it's defined by being important about, is really important at different ages. So yeah, with that being said, as always, be kind to yourself and live a little.